Yes, we are validating. There's oppression, there's extraordinary obstacles in the system, and what is within our own agency, and why is it so important that we consider what's in our own agency?
Everyone I know went into medicine because we love medicine and we want to do medicine. And so there are tools out there that allow you to go forward with a little bit more power and agency, feeling empowered. And many people who've either listened to the talk or come to the retreats and kind of learned this, they say, I had no idea I could move forward and now I can breathe again.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel, or welcome to the channel if you're new here. I am honored to have Dr. Jessie Mahoney. Jessie is a board-certified pediatrician who has become a full-time certified master physician coach and is also a physician wellness consultant. And I've met her through her coaching, through her mindful yoga, which I absolutely love, and listening to your podcast, the Mindful Healers podcast. I can't get enough of you. I love your presence, and you have your pause and presence, which is both your coaching community and your retreats. So I am so grateful that you're here. You have so much wisdom and insight to share and helping us to create agency with our own lives as we tackle the systemic issues that are integrated within healthcare. So Jessie, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me. It's so nice to be here.
And for people who haven't had the honor of meeting you, would you mind sharing your story?
I would be happy to. And I will say it's today's version of your story, right? In coaching, we talk so much about stories. And so it's what part you tell. And what I thought would be fun to share today is more of my journey and what I would call institutional wellness or team wellness and how that fits in with the individual. Because what I've seen a lot in medicine in particular is people wanting a system to fix things for them. And yes, I always say the system is fully broken and we have our own responsibility and our own agency and things that we can do while hopefully the system gets fixed. But it's going to take a long time because it's such a huge system. And so my story that I'll reflect on today is that I worked as a chief of physician health and wellness at a large healthcare institution while practicing pediatrics and also being a physician leader for about 18 years. And more recently, about 5 years ago, I pivoted to leading Pause and Presence, which is my own company where I work on essentially physician wellness full time. And the reason I did that is that at that point, I had a lot of training and skills myself, plus this long history working within an organization. And what I found is within an organization, no matter how well meaning they are and how forward thinking they are, they can only be so nimble. And when you provide services and support people from the outside, you can be much more nimble and you can provide, as I like to say, exactly what you know they need. And what I found through my 18 years of leading wellness and matching that with physician leadership, so being site chief of the department and navigating all of the things that within organizational leadership conflicts with wellness leadership. And so having both of those roles gave me this sort of unique insight into solutions. And I think once I had my coach training and my mindfulness and yoga teacher training, and all those years of sort of leadership experience, you can blend them together and see what was needed. And I couldn't do that from where I was. And so I made this pivot right around the time I turned 50. So maybe it's a midlife crisis, although I like to actually say it's not a crisis. It's like many of us just remember who we are.
Mhm.
And having been through coaching training and mindfulness training, I had a very clear sense of who I was and what my purpose and passion was and what I was meant to do. So I often tell people like I couldn't not do it. And I didn't leave my practice because I was burnt out or I didn't like it. I actually did like it. And after doing all of the coaching and mindfulness, it was fine. I just had this mission and purpose that I felt that I couldn't not pursue because I was someone who was uniquely qualified to go out and do it.
I love how you showcase that because people are afraid to step out of the clinic and often think that their biggest value is within the clinic. And I know what I've engaged in and the reach you can have because you're not limited to the constructs of the organization as you highlighted. And I think that is so important for people to really allow themselves to consider and to embrace, because I do think it's a limiting belief and sometimes gets us trapped into the traditional path.
Also think we
Mhm.
tell a story that, clinical medicine is the panacea, and anyone who
Mm.
does something else has either left or, has jumped ship, or maybe it's way better. We attach all of these stories and values to it. And I personally believe, first of all, there are seasons, and I was a great pediatrician for 20 years,
Yeah.
and my skills are now much better served doing what I'm doing. And it isn't, a lot of people say, "Oh, you left medicine." I haven't left medicine. I talk medicine all day, every day, and
Yeah.
I'm probably having much more impact on more patients now than I ever did as a pediatrician. And so I think we just have different roles over a career, and medicine is so complex that it's actually lovely for us to get to do different things and impact things from different perspectives all along the way.
It's curious too, right? Because when people project the considerations of leaving medicine, it makes me wonder what's coming up for them.
Mhm.
And when it comes to what the conflicts were between the organizational leadership and wellness leadership, can you go into a little bit more depth on what you were noticing?
Yeah. So when you are the chief of your department, you have all these metrics that you have to meet. So the access metrics and the service metrics and the patient satisfaction scores, and a lot of pressure from above with this program they want to roll out, or this thing they want to emphasize. And those are often in direct conflict to what physicians need.
Mm.
And the way that I always approached it, and I actually used to give a talk called Leading with a Lens to Wellness. I gave it at the International Conference for Physician Health, I think in 2018. But I had run a program for department leaders, because essentially if you lead with a lens to wellness, whatever decision you make has to be good for patients, good for doctors, and good for staff. And it's not good for all of them. It's not a good policy. But when you're in that position, you're beholden to people above you who maybe aren't making that decision. And so I often remind people that while we think of chiefs of departments as leaders, we're actually middle managers, because we're kind of caught in the in between. And so that was where I really started to say, well, we have to lead with a lens to wellness. And if you have, it's not, patient-centered care versus taking care of your physicians. You actually have to do all of them. Otherwise, it's not patient-centered care, because your physicians are so tired and leaving and committing suicide and all kinds of things. And so that's not patient-centered care. So I think it's really important that we have to look at the whole picture. And what I realized is that there's nobody looking at the whole picture, or at least there wasn't 5 years ago. And so when I would decisions, you sort of had to choose one versus the other, which I refused to do. So it made my job a lot harder. And yet I think being in that unique spot actually allowed me to educate both sides, as I would say, because we're really actually all on the same team. And I think that concept of leading with a lens to wellness is something that I have not seen anyone else talk about or share. And I think it's a really important concept. Maybe we'll have to talk about it again on
Yeah.
another session, because it's something that if you don't lead from that lens, you don't have well patients, you don't have a successful department. And actually what I'll add, and I feel a little, this is not gloating or bragging, but I think it's really important, is one of my jobs was to build a brand new pediatric clinic towards the end of my career. And I opened it up, built basically with leading to a lens to wellness, because that was how I thought. And it ended up having the highest patient satisfaction scores, the highest HEDIS
Amazing.
measures,
Yeah. Mm.
et cetera. And because that was the focus. Now, over time, a lot of those things got taken away, and a lot of the numbers got changed, because it's like we can't,
I'm feeling the stress. I'm stressed.
there
I'm
was
stress
so
sweating
much
right now.
stress, right? So much stress. And yet it was possible, right? It was just
Uh,
possible. And so to show that it's
mm,
possible, I think is
yeah.
really important. And so I do know it's possible, and it doesn't cost any more money.
Yeah.
It's
Probably
really
saves money.
just, it saves money in the long run.
Yeah.
And so, but it takes a very specific crafting and a specific conversation,
Yeah. I
different way of
feel
thinking.
like we will have this conversation another time. We can pull in some of the chief wellness officer discussions
Oh,
I've
that'd
had
be
that are
fantastic. Yeah.
very much aligned.
Yeah.
But for the physicians that are in the system right now, there's a learned helplessness, the feeling trapped, the I'm so mad at the system, and we can ruminate about it and we can fixate on the things that are outside of our control. But for this discussion, we really want to support people in, yes, we are validating there's oppression, there's extraordinary obstacles in the system, and what is within our own agency, and why is it so important that we consider what's in our own agency?
Yeah, and this is really what I've been focusing on this year. And you mentioned sort of what's your current project. So I tried to think, what is my current project? And
Mhm.
I have been giving a grand rounds talk, and or I do this at sort of team retreats where I talk about things should be different. It should be different. Although in those cases I say medicine should be different.
Mhm, mhm.
And you can still make a difference, because I think in my wellness work, everyone wants it to be a systemic problem. And yet, yes, it is a systemic problem, but then we are right back into our learned helplessness
Yeah,
and our, victimhood. And that doesn't make it better. And everyone I know went into medicine because we love medicine and we want to do medicine. And so there are tools out there that allow you to go forward with a little bit more power and agency, feeling empowered. And many people who've either listened to the talk or come to the retreats and kind of learned this, they say, I had no idea I could move forward and now I can breathe again. And
yeah.
so, what I like to share is, and I think I've really couched it all in this mindfulness perspective, because the key thing about mindfulness is not sitting on a mat and meditating, though that's fantastic and allows you to breathe more deeply, but it's actually a way of approaching the world. And so it's a way of noticing how you think. And so we have a lot of physician thought patterns that cause us a lot of trouble, and we can talk about those. In order to change them, you have to see them, number one, but you also have to upregulate your parasympathetic nervous system. Nobody's changing anything from threatened fight or flight, completely depleted.
Yeah.
And that is what mindfulness is about.
Mm.
You also have to have self-compassion, which I know you talk about, also a
Yeah.
key component of mindfulness. And then mindfulness has these tenets or approaches or attitudes. Every different mindfulness guru calls them something different. But the idea is it's a way of approaching the world, which is basically the antidote, or like the Narcan, for all these thought patterns that we have that get us into trouble. And so that's why I call what I do mindful coaching, because you can decide that you need to change the thought patterns, and we can go back to our doctor philosophy of like pushing ourselves and whipping ourselves into don't think like that, don't be negative
Mm.
anymore, don't be a
Mhm.
victim. And that doesn't work. But
Yeah.
when you approach it with this mindfulness approach, where you are slowing down, taking good care of your nervous system, repleting yourself, being compassionate, and noticing how you're thinking, that's where the answers lie.
And I think that what you captured here was the non-judgmental component of mindfulness.
Mhm. Mhm.
Really ironically funny. I don't think it's ironic. I think it will be a shared experience with people who start mindfulness from that place of high levels of self-criticism and low levels of self-compassion. When I first sat in stillness, it was all the self-defeating shame. It was like, this feels awful. This is not
Yeah.
helpful. And then I did, well, I love your yoga. I love you. And you incorporate like coaching with yoga. And
Call it coaching yoga.
it's so fantastic. And humorously, my dog does it. And also, when I started going, I was really having a hard time committing to yoga.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, I love Jessie. I'm going to go to her
Mm.
yoga. And it's been the most, I've gone to more of your yogas than I've ever gone to yoga before. And when I first started, I would go and I would just lay there and listen to you. It's like, that's all my nervous system could take. I'm like, I can't do it all.
Yeah.
And so I increased it. And then I was like, well, I can do 20 minutes. I can do 30, and I can do an hour. But I've noticed the shifting, and I started mindfulness meditation teacher certification programs to like force myself to do
Mhm. Mhm.
meditation. And I realized that if you've been in this high sympathetic drive, there's this transitional period where it's awful, and like having trauma stored in your body, you actually don't want to dive full speed ahead into mindfulness and slow down, because you can flood yourself. And it's been maybe 2 years of, I don't know when I started engaging in yoga. It's been
Yeah.
at least 2 years, I think, that I started
Yeah.
going. But it's that process, right, of just changing and
Yeah. I
resetting.
tell people that I got into yoga because I couldn't sit on a mat and do
Mm,
mindfulness. And in yoga, you move. and someone's guiding you, and
Yeah.
you have this way of sort of shifting the energy. And so for anyone who struggles with mindfulness, I say yoga is actually a great way. If it's yoga that's not power yoga, hot yoga, exercise yoga,
Yeah.
which is not actually yoga philosophically, because yoga is actually a philosophy that's very aligned with mindfulness, but you get to move. And it's really a blend of a lot of the sort of somatic work and what's trapped in your body and moving that and mindfulness. And so doing it all at the same time is really powerful. And one of the reasons I strategically bring coaching into it, right, is that in yoga you're relaxed and you're breathing. And so then these ideas of shifting feel a lot less threatening, and you are no longer in your sympathetic nervous system, hopefully, or you're coming down out of it. And so you can absorb some of these changes that you may not be able to absorb when you are just in your head thinking about it.
Yeah, and I want to really highlight that point because when I didn't know burnout was a thing, but when I went through what it now I realized was like fried to exhaustion. I at the time thought I had to continue my surgical residency or take my own life. Very vividly, two options, and that's what your brain may offer you
Mm,
if you are exhausted. Like
mm,
I have a journal. I have the same therapist now that I had back then. I clearly could not think of anything more. And that's what my brain, that was the reality of my brain. And I wouldn't believe it now because I can't even get myself to think that way. But I read the journal and I could remember what I was experiencing back then. And so for the people who are trapped and unfortunately the high rates of suicide, I'm experiencing memories of what that felt like. If your brain's not going to offer you the options, you're going to think they're limited. And the ability to get yourself into that pause and presence, ironically associated with your coaching, and it's a gift that might save lives. So I
yeah.
really appreciate what you're
And
doing.
I would say if you're really in that crisis spot, you need more help than just yoga and more help than just coaching, for
You
sure.
definitely do. I
Um,
mean, I was saying therapy that I was in at the
yeah,
time, and
yeah.
I took FMLAs and I was inpatient for a while, and all of that now I look at with a non-judgmental lens as that's what I needed to do to save my life. And so
But
certainly,
I do have people who join me, and I will mention because I don't think we've mentioned, but I teach free live stream yoga most weeks, and everyone's welcome to join me. And I have people who come and then reach out. And
yeah,
it to me, it's like any door that allows you in to work on some of this stuff and find the help you need is amazing. And so if coming to a yoga class works,
yeah,
great. Then reach out. Like getting help however you can is the most important thing. And I think we all have a different like crack that lets the light in. And yoga is often that. And so I will often say when I'm teaching some of the poses, especially hip releases like pigeon pose, people tend to cry and have big releases. And I
hmm
don't want to frighten people from joining. It
yeah.
actually sometimes just that gets you feeling so much better. I will say when
Mhm.
I am having a hard day and I go do yoga, I feel infinitely better. I have a completely different perspective. I often say when we're upside down, one of the reasons to put your head down in yoga is to have a different perspective. And so you're literally shifting your physiology. And many people don't realize that that's what mindfulness is about, because I think of yoga and mindfulness and self compassion is really about neurochemicals and neuromodulators. And so while we treat them in medicine with medicines, yoga and mindfulness also allow you to release them and shift that soup or create a different recipe that's much healthier for you. And so when you think about working in a medical system that's broken, this is a strategic way to move
Yeah.
forward, is to
Mm.
change the neurochemical soup. Most of us working in medicine bathe ourselves in cortisol 24/7,
Yeah.
and
Mm.
we're exhausted and norepinephrine and are depleted. And then we wonder why we're so burnt out. And so, yes, there's a systemic problem, but this is something that we can also work on to help care for ourselves. And whether or not it's our responsibility, why wouldn't you do it? Because it's better for you. And it's
Yeah.
not a pass for the system. But when we do that, we can actually be part of the solution for the system. And I actually believe that physicians are going to be the answer. We've left it to higher level administrators and they haven't figured it
Yeah,
out.
there's
And
no way. We are our
yeah.
own advocates. I mean, I went to Mindfulness Mondays in residency, and I actually just reached out to the psychiatrist who led those because like that was where I had clarity. I wouldn't miss it because it was the only time I got relief
Mhm.
from all I was going through at the time. And it's that positive reinforcement, right? Where you feel good, so you go. And you don't have to actually, I should say with a disclaimer that mindfulness isn't meant to feel good. You just
Yeah.
feel and you're present.
Yeah.
But it helped me to gain clarity and to observe thought patterns. And I'd love to go into the thought patterns
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
notice. But there's like those thought patterns that I believe for so long aren't actually true. And or
Yeah.
like I don't actually have to believe them. And so what are some common themes that come up that we might want
Yeah.
to consider
And I want to
challenging?
reflect one thing on the mindfulness, which is it doesn't
Mhm.
have to feel good, but it can. And
Yeah.
so for many people, it's just taking deep breaths. And as physicians, we hold our breath. That's something I notice as a yoga teacher. And so if you can just breathe, mindfulness can be as simple as taking some deep breaths. And that can be the first step to having clarity, or the first step to taking a pause. It doesn't have to be knowing how to sit on a mat in discomfort for 45 minutes. I like to say there's a way in for everybody. And part of that is just finding someone to work with who can help you find it, whether it's restorative yoga, breathing, nature, forest bathing, like we can
Oh
all
my
find
gosh,
our way.
forest bathing. You
Yeah.
introduced me to that concept.
Yeah.
I think
So,
I think actually before we go into
yeah,
the mindfulness,
yeah,
because I think breathing, it's such an easy, short
yeah,
exercise. Would you mind
yeah.
walking us through a breathing exercise?
Sure. And I'm going to make it as simple as possible.
Okay.
So, to start just coming into your body, I find it really helpful to close eyes. I know some people find that uncomfortable, but for me, it quiets the noise that's out there. And then coming back to your breath and breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. And once again, breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. And if it would feel good, bringing a hand to heart and another hand to top, just noticing how that feels. Breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth. And just pause here and notice how you feel. And once again, take a noticeable, purposeful, intentional breath in through your nose. And let the exhale be longer than the inhale. Pause at the end. Coming back to your normal breathing. And perhaps pressing that heel of the hand into your heart space, just releasing a little oxytocin. And then opening your eyes and coming back together. And that was 5 deep breaths.
It's incredible.
Yeah. It's kind of a magical trick. And I
Hmm.
like to say your breath is always available. I often say that in yoga, but I think it's even more relevant. It's available in your practice. It's available while you're driving in traffic. It's available. And so using it as a tool, it's not cheating. It's actually like the easiest, most helpful thing that we can partake of. And there are tons of different breathing ways, patterns, etc. But that's why I teach the in through your nose and out through your mouth. Like that's simple. It's not complicated.
No.
And you get so much benefit just slowing down and paying attention.
I was noticing I walk my dog every morning and I was like, it's super stressful because
Mm-hmm.
he does not like to walk very fast. And I was like, the stress is I'm creating the stress. Like he's a dog that wants to take his time. I am creating the stress by wanting it to be different.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have had to put intentions. It's like, I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to be present with my dog, allow him to stroll. I don't like to do anything where I have like a time crunch where I have to speed through it. It's like, why am I creating so much stress of not accepting the reality and what is, but always wanting it to be different? So I would strongly recommend people try that exercise when they're noticing they're just frustrated and like, what are you wishing was different in this moment?
Yeah.
And like for me, I'm like, I'm admitting I'm the problem. I'm the
Yeah.
problem here.
I love that. Well, that gets loops right back to wishing it were different, because I
Yeah.
think in medicine we wish it were different. And so I like to say you can still make a difference. And that's with the mindfulness, but it's also with noticing those thought patterns. And if you are in your autopilot thought patterns, you can't make a difference because you're always just doing whatever your brain is auto doing. And so slowing down and noticing them. And many of them are really obvious, like focusing on the negative. So we're trained to focus in medicine on what's wrong. And so we move through our practices noticing what's wrong. We look at our colleagues noticing what's wrong. We come home and notice what's wrong with our children and our partners. You're noticing what's wrong with your dog, right? It's like that's just the lens that we bring to things. And so I was a primary care pediatrician. And so I took perfectly healthy kids and figured out what was wrong. So I have this like incredibly heightened sense of it. And once I was aware of it, I was just like, oh, that's me looking at the negative again. And so specifically asking good questions or choosing, you don't even have to be all Pollyanna, just like give equal weight to the positive and negative. We tend to catastrophize too, because we were trained to do that. Worst case scenario. We see the worst, and so we're aware of it, but we also are always preparing for the worst in medicine. And that has a huge emotional cost. And so I think even just starting there. And then we are trained to really go at things from shame, blame, and guilt. Notice what's wrong with us, what we did wrong, feel bad about it, feel guilty about it, and approach things as if we're sacrificing ourselves and being a martyr. That's glorified. That's what a good doctor does, but it's not sustainable and it's
Yeah.
not healthy. And I would add, it's not mindful.
Mm-mm.
And we're incredible judgers. We were trained to judge ourselves. That's how we got to where we got, judge our colleagues, judge our patients even. I always hesitate to say that, but that's what we do in many ways in medicine inadvertently. The language we use is judgmental. And so if we're approaching everything judgmentally, it's very hard to feel satisfied and not be burnt out, if that makes sense.
And what are the first steps to shifting?
So the first step to me is slowing down and taking a few breaths, like pausing and noticing what's actually happening. And the nervous system retraining, I think, is really important. And you can do all of this at the same time. And I like to tell people to do yoga, but if you don't want to do yoga, do some forest bathing, sit on your mat, breathe a little bit, do any old mindfulness app. We overcomplicate it. And
Yeah.
then we say, well, I have to be mindful first before I can work on X. You can work on it all at the same time. And practicing some self-compassion, you have to do that in order to change. We can't hate ourselves into change or be mean to ourselves. And so to me, self-compassion is perhaps just making a pact to stop being mean to yourself, subversively telling terrible stories about why you did this or et cetera. Feeling regret is one of those. And then it's looking at the thought patterns and deciding how you want to show up instead. So there are a lot of different tips and tricks about each of them. And, we just talked about a couple. There are so many more. I have my list is growing and growing by the day. But I think realizing that we were trained to show up in these ways. And so once you've seen them, the easiest way I like to approach it is really those tenets of mindfulness, which are the opposite of them. So noticing and awareness is one, but non-judgment is a mindfulness one,
Mm-hmm.
non-striving. And so that gets you out of perfectionism. Um, Trust is one, letting go is one, patience is one. And so if you're thinking about these ways of approaching things, we all want to be that person who is trusting and patient and lets go of things out of their control and who is aware and is intentional. The other thing we say is what you pay attention to is your life. Attention is one of the tenets of mindfulness. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's choosing your attention. Are you going to choose to notice all the things that are wrong or have a balanced perspective? Notice equally what's wrong and what's right. Many of us have to practice noticing what's right almost full time in order to negate our old tendencies. But in the end, you're really just going to have a more balanced approach. And I think we are terrified to change because all of these patterns got us to where we are. And so we
Mm.
think they're necessary. And so I see this a lot where physicians don't want to look at these thought patterns and they don't want to see them because then they would have to change them because they can see that they're causing harm, right? And we took an oath to do no harm, except we're all doing harm to ourselves with these thought patterns. And yet, what I would offer is we don't know what it would be like to move forward without them. And they are helpful in some cases. And so it's really a matter of being discerning. And all of us want to be discerning or thoughtful or purposeful or intentional about when we use certain ways of thinking. And so if we can be discerning / intentional, which is another component of mindfulness, then you get to choose how you want to move forward. And how simple is that?
I also think for me, when I heard mindfulness, a common theme that I hear people say the reluctance towards self-compassion is, oh, I thought it was weak and fluffy and that it would let down my guard and that I would be more lazy and complacent. And the opposite is true. So I thought as a surgeon, like I had all these self-critical beliefs and I thought I had to beat myself down, build myself up. I was taught as a
Yeah.
very emotionally sensitive person that I should grow thicker skin. And a leadership style of one of the attendings that I had a hard time working with was very much cut you down until you cried. And like,
Mhm.
then you build yourself up, but you don't really. But then I heard Brene Brown say in her research, she found that the people with the highest levels of mental toughness, what she found is they had the highest levels of self-compassion. And like, that actually makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I noticed I don't love to use the word resilience because it's activating for people, but it's an appropriate word for this was that I realized once I leaned into self-compassion, I overcame setbacks really fast. Was like, oh, now it just became a growth opportunity. I didn't deepen my wounds by
Mhm.
using self-criticism, shame, and guilt for a mistake and then perpetuate further
And if you
harm.
think about it physiologically, which is something I talk about a lot, right? If you
Mhm.
go into guilt or shame or blame, being mean to yourself about a perceived mistake or a mistake, right? That releases cortisol and norepinephrine.
Mhm.
Working on your brain, it's shutting down your higher thinking, it's shutting down your learning centers. Whereas self compassion releases oxytocin, turns on your learning centers. And so,
Mm.
actually, that's the way we should be training people in medicine, right? If you have an
Gosh.
undesired outcome, which is what I
Oh,
choose to call it
yeah.
now, rather than an
Yeah.
unexpected or a bad outcome, right? An undesired outcome. If we could all go into self compassion, that would honor the patient. It would honor the field of medicine. It would honor all the future physicians and future patients coming behind us because we would all be learning from it. Shauna
Mm.
Shapiro talks about self compassion as a life raft for difficult times or difficult seas, I think she says. I don't have it quite right, but it's the same idea. And I love that idea as a life raft. I often talk about my coaching as buoyancy coaching because I don't like the word resilience either, since you
Mhm.
brought it up.
Yeah.
And so I think of buoyancy as like, how do you stay afloat in these stormy seas of
Yeah.
medicine? And so mindfulness and noticing these thought patterns that we were taught that are not, that need discernment about when we use them,
Mm.
that keeps us buoyant. So if we get sucked under and we're in our people pleasing, martyrdom, victimhood mindset,
Yeah.
we can actually notice it and it pops you back up to the surface. And so I think self-compassion is really that life raft, the buoyancy. It's a life jacket. Same idea, because you're releasing all these neurochemicals that actually help you learn and grow. And so when I learned that science, I was like, oh, it's not complacent. It was very simple for me to make that shift. And I also find that a lot of people really struggle with this idea of self-compassion slash self-love, which is way over there. And so I think for anyone listening who finds that a challenge, can you just be not mean to yourself? Like,
Yeah.
start there. Notice when you're mean. Notice when you say you did a bad job, you should have done better. Why did you do that? What's wrong with you? How come you didn't notice? How come things that make you feel bad, and stop doing that?
It's that 1 degree turn, right? It's
Yes.
like, I find when we set up, if you're feeling really down and burnout, for someone to offer you something that is, you'll be thriving, you'll feel joyful. Oftentimes we meet that with like, hell no, resistance
Mhm.
because it's not the right step. And for me, it's like when it came to an eating disorder, which I use as an
Mhm.
example because I
Mhm.
have an experience using it I have a lot of experience with examples, but when I was offered where I am to where I need to be, if the gap was
Mhm.
too far, I was less likely to make any changes. So having those 1 degree, what can I do today that's I can be very successful at accomplishing that, even if it's, if you're down and I'm going to find Jessie's YouTube channel with her yoga. I'm just going to find the channel. Where can they find the channel?
It is, just look up mindful yoga for healers or with Jessie Mahoney. I think if you even type my name, as long as you get the IE part, JESSIE, you will find it on YouTube.
Yeah. So you're going to find it on YouTube. I'm going to subscribe so I know when it comes out. And that's it. I'm not even going to try it. That's like still one step.
Yeah. Well, and I think so often we are such high achievers. We want to do all the things and
Yeah.
fix it. And again, it's 1%, 5%. What's your next step?
Yeah.
Because when you have too far to go, you're back releasing cortisol, stress hormones, and it's much harder to go. And so we're literally making it harder on ourselves to change.
And having those small wins, right?
Mhm.
Because if you're just getting those small wins, you get the momentum, the inertia.
Yeah.
I train my dog right now, and so I apply a lot of my trainers' messages about my dog's training to my life because he sets my dog up for success. So if we do this training exercise and my dog's not thriving in it, not succeeding, we scale it back a little bit. And I always laugh. I'm like, I just literally will leave that session and apply it to something I'm doing in my own life. I'm like, how can I set my own self, have a little self-compassion, and maybe it's not having 10 things on your to-do list, but maybe it's one or two.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna scale that back a little bit.
Imagine if medical training was like dog training.
Yeah,
How amazing would that be?
we get treats
Because
and
I
stuff.
think we just weren't taught to think that way.
Yeah,
And so to me, the other thing about this self-compassion is you can even just start by noticing. You know, as you said, right, go to the yoga and subscribe, but you don't have to do it. But you can even just notice how you're not nice to yourself. We
yeah,
were trained that being mean to yourself is the way to achieve more. And
yeah.
notice all the things you're doing wrong and notice what's wrong with you. And that becomes our lens. But if we can just notice that our brain's doing that, I often say that's like 70 to 80% of the shift. You
Yeah.
can learn all the tips and tricks for making it better. But if you can notice, which is mindfulness, is literally noticing and being aware. And that's the first step. And you get so much benefit from just saying, wow, I'm just being really mean to myself. I should opt out. And I love opting out as an option. You're just
Mhm.
like, oh, maybe I'll just opt out of that approach. You
Yeah.
don't have to pick a new approach. You don't have to say, like, oh, I'm amazing. And that I think is part of this thing about how medicine should be different. But what's one thing you can do differently? What's one way that you can think differently? And that can even be just noticing that you're always focusing on what's wrong. And do you want
Mm.
to keep doing that? Or noticing that your default thought pattern is to sacrifice and be a martyr, or be toxically independent and do it yourself because you're better and faster. And then you wonder why no one's helping you anymore when you've not let them
Mhm.
help you, for example. And so if you can just see it and
Yeah.
and
You're
and
you're
have a
talking
little
right
loving
to me.
amusement, which is my favorite one, right?
Yeah.
Bring some loving amusement to it all. That's
Yeah.
all you need to do.
You just totally I am your prototype.
Yes, you
I'm
are.
like,
I
"Oh,
know.
yeah."
I know.
I'm like, why does no one help me? Oh, because I refuse to ask for it.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's very interesting because as you're saying it, what I was thinking about was the benefit of your group coaching,
Yeah.
where you hear yourself coming out of someone else's mouth.
Yes.
And you're like, well, isn't that interesting? Can you share a little bit more about your coaching?
Yeah, I would love to. I do group coaching in a number of different ways. I do topic-based small groups online where we'll have a group of women physician, I call it ongoing presence, or a group of parents where it's parent with presence. I currently have a group of relationship coaching called Mindful Love. I love coming up with cool names for these things, or
Yeah.
Transition Well is the other one. And what I'll offer is there are groups of people going through similar things. They're all learning the same thing because you take the coaching and you put the lens of whatever the topic is. And I like to offer those different groups because people can decide, okay, I'm going to work on my parenting, even though I don't really want to work on myself yet, or I'm not really comfortable, but I'm worried about this. So I'll come in for that. And then they get all the benefit of it. Same thing happens at retreats, which are essentially small group coaching, whether they're, a team retreat or a longer retreat with yoga and culinary medicine, where you are in a small group so it feels safe. And you are exactly hearing other people who are saying the things that are going on in your head. Or even if you've done a lot of coaching, you hear someone else talking about something, you say, oh, that's an issue I haven't noticed that I had yet. And
Mm.
so then all of a sudden, it normalizes it. You don't feel alone. You don't feel isolated. And you can, when you see yourself in someone else, it's a little bit funny. And then when you bring humor to it, again, you're out of that judgment, self-blame, shame, and you can begin to make shifts. And so I
Mm.
find group coaching to be incredibly powerful. My ideal way to do coaching is to have people do some group and some one-on-one, because what I find is everyone, when they get a little bit of that personal attention, they feel much safer and they're much more willing to
Yeah.
share in a group. And so at most of my retreats, I also offer at least one session of one-on-one, because I like to know, give people that chance. And it really gives them a sense of safety and a sense of calm and groundedness and confidence. And then they're usually willing to go back to the group and share what they learned. And that's even more powerful.
Yeah.
And so with almost all my small groups, people will opt in for a couple of one-on-one coaching sessions, because it's really a beautiful way to make your own progress. You don't need it, but I think that everyone deserves a little bit of attention. And I always like to tell people that's my favorite thing, is to have some one-on-one. And I've done a lot of group coaching, and I do a lot of group coaching. And I will
Yeah.
say, even when I'm coaching people, I'm like, oh, yeah, I still need to work on that.
Mm-hmm.
And so because we're all human, and many
Yeah.
people wonder what coaching is, and it's really like how to manage a human brain and how to move through life with more intention and more clarity and more mindfulness, is how I like to think about it. But it allows us to navigate challenging things. I often say that professional athletes, they all have coaches for
Yeah.
everything, right?
Mhm.
Mindset, nutrition, sleep, mindfulness. I don't know what else they have coaching. They have it for everything. And yet physicians and people in medicine, and anyone in medicine, we're just supposed to do it ourselves. We're not
Yeah.
supposed to need any help. And our brains are just, I don't know, supposed to manage themselves, even though we're managing life and death, and we're doing it without sleep and in a very judgmental culture. And yet what we do is so important. And then if you think about people, you were in a surgical specialty, right? Surgeries are way longer than a
Yeah.
basketball game. I was
Mhm.
just watching the women's championship. It's way
Oh,
longer,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, why
Mhm.
don't we need some sort of support or coaching? And one of the reasons I think that coaching is so accessible to doctors is that it's not therapy and there's not
Yeah.
something wrong with you. And so people
Mhm.
are willing to engage in it. But I think even if you feel okay, it can be really helpful, because it's really about optimizing. It's really about, how can I do this and have it, I like just in quotes, cost me less, be less expensive.
Yeah.
So a lot of those thought patterns that we were trained to have, like more is better and harder is better, those are exhausting. But once you are onto them, you can move through your career in medicine and have it be much more sustainable and less
Mhm.
expensive, so that you
Yeah.
can keep doing what you love.
Sustainability is huge when it comes to the benefits of coaching. I think sustainability, reducing your own internal suffering caused by your own thoughts and beliefs, and trying to change one thing that I did for a
Yeah.
year was I was really upset about the behavior of a person. And every morning I would
Ah,
walk stressed out, wanting this
mhm,
person to change and
mhm.
just, oh, I was in a coaching program getting certified, and it was the same perseverating thought I had every day. We know you can't coach a person who's not in the room. And I was like, what do I need to let go of here? And the moment that I released any desire, I actually did. There's a meditation by Jack Cornfield.
Cornfield, yeah, yeah.
Cornfield. It's seeing like the shared humanity in the other person, just like me. It's called
Just like
Just
me.
Like
Yeah.
Me. And the caveat there is that we want to you can see the shared humanity and also maintain strong boundaries with those people who are harmful to you. But I ended up showing up more with compassion for this person and
Yeah.
gratitude. You were talking about how often we
Mindfulness. Yeah.
focus,
Yeah.
yeah, we focus on the negatives. And I was like, and I'm
Mhm.
also grateful for this person.
Yeah.
Like, I care about this person. I value this person. And sometimes this person does things that harm me. And it was really harmful. I don't feel seen and valued and appreciated. And I also didn't see, value, and appreciate myself. So
Yeah.
thank you for that gift, right? Because I
Yeah.
accepted those terms. And what can come up for people, why it's great to have therapy and coaching at the time, is I think what you get coached on, then you ask, well, where did I develop that? Right. And that's where that deep work, shall you choose to want to dive into that, the benefits of therapy. And I think somatic type approaches to things like your yoga, I'm like, I think
Yeah.
because we store so much
Yeah.
within our bodies, just some sort of movement to like get it out and not suffer so
Well,
much.
notice you mentioned letting go there, another mindfulness tenet,
Yeah.
right? And we were
Hmm.
taught the opposite in medicine: ruminate, hold on to it, try to fix it, and that everything is in our control, including other people. And so it's no wonder that we're always frustrated.
Yeah.
because actually other people are not in our control, even our patients. All we can do is make recommendations. And no matter how much motivational interviewing you do, not everybody's going to change their mind. And so to me,
Mm.
it's like understanding what's in your control, what you put out there.
Mm-hmm.
And then this other person, we do have to let go. It's really hard for us as doctors.
I think another value of coaching is the curious mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Is
Yeah.
when a person doesn't change, we are confused if we would have changed in their situation. But if we get curious and I wonder why they didn't change in their situation, right? And like, I
Yeah.
wonder what's coming up for them or what their resistance is from their lens, not from my own lens. I find that that place of curiosity rather than judgment really relieves a lot of inner tension.
Yeah. And curiosity, again, another mindfulness tenet, right? We call it
Yeah.
beginner's mind or curiosity.
Yeah. I was just reading a quote about like the beginner's mind has a lot to learn and the expert, I don't remember exactly the quote, but it was about maintaining the beginner's mind for that humility of learning, right? We're like
Yeah.
always learning. And
Yeah.
if you're an expert, you kind of just like shut down and think you know it all.
Yeah. Well, and I think, in medicine, we are taught that there is some expert level and we're supposed to come at it from this one right way, right? We're taught right versus wrong instead of all the different levels of gray. And beginner's mind is anti-right versus wrong.
Mm. As a research fellow, I have thrown out the beliefs that we know it all and there's black and white and there's an answer. I used to think in med school and in dental school that I'm going to read the textbook has all the answers. And then as we learn more, you learn that we still have millions of dollars, billions of dollars going into research because the way that we practice the thoughts that we had at any time point, we can get new evidence that suggests that we were wrong.
Mhm.
And having a condition that's been so wrong, like my own internal medical condition that's been so wrong in medicine for so long, I always think, well, what if we're wrong about everything else? And
Yeah.
it creates this curiosity that's always open to exploring new evidence and understanding that somebody could have invested their whole life to studying a condition, and I value their expertise. And what could we be missing?
Yeah. Well, because medicine changes. Everything, like if I think about all the things that I was taught in peds 20 years ago versus what's true now, we give different vaccines, we use different
Mm.
antibiotics. We know so much, about if you think like IBD or something, like everything's completely different. So you have to have beginner's mind.
Yeah.
And yet I think we often don't show up as curious as we could be.
Mm. Like you said, first step awareness.
Yeah. And I think that's really what coaching and mindfulness are about is being curious. And I think when we get into this, the system is wrong, the system is broken, which it is, it needs help. But what can we do now? How can we be curious about where we are? How can we be curious about what we can change for ourselves? And potentially when we change, the energy around us changes and things change for our colleagues. And I think it opens up the light can come in and the culture can begin to change. And I do think that culture begins with one. It's every single person changing the way they show up. And when you show up, you give someone else the opportunity to change the way that they show up. So I think I hear so many people saying, well, that's just not how it works. It's like, well, it has to start somewhere.
Yeah.
So let it be you that it starts with and work on your own mindset so you get some relief and work on your own nervous system and your own neurochemical pool, neuromodulator pool, because that's just going to begin the shift.
I love that. And I also appreciate I like to make changes. Like if something is
Mhm.
ineffective, military, right? I got into the military and did
Mhm.
surgery because I like to make changes quickly. And if I see a problem, I want to solve it, which all medicine does, right? Usually. And some environments that are resistant to change, I've had some people on my channel that were terminated without cause. And I think a lot of times when we are change leaders, we have to prepare ourselves for the risks
Mhm.
and the discomfort of, I'm no longer going to tolerate this. And when
Yeah.
you feel that tension, that resistance, set yourself up to be safe if you were to be let go, if that environment doesn't want to change alongside you, because that's an unfortunate reality. And as somebody who has been in circumstances that I realized that even if I thought I was making a positive change to the environment, if your environment is that resistant, or if there's a threat to the ego, these name brand institutions that don't want anyone to question the way they do things necessarily. Those are the institutions that I've heard from my own being in groups where people are getting pushback, and so it's probably not the right environment for you. So set yourself up in order to get to an environment, if you aren't be able to create it in the one that you're in, to be conducive to flowing with you in this change and the alignment with what you really want. Because as we mentioned, sustainability is where it's at.
I also think that believing and connecting with hope that your institution might not be ready to change yet.
Yeah.
Because a lot of institutions want to change, they just aren't able to yet, or they're not ready yet. And so I think we often think like we are at odds with them, and yet maybe you're just on a different time course. To me,
Yeah.
that feels much softer, because I do believe that people in healthcare, they don't want to do the wrong thing. Nobody at any level in healthcare wants to do the wrong thing. And so what if they're just a couple years behind you, or a decade behind you, maybe,
Yeah.
but hopefully just a couple years behind where you are thinking about wellness. And that hopefully every institution in medicine, I think these days, is aware of it. They're just at different points on the journey towards getting to a place where physicians matter also, and not just physicians, but everyone in healthcare matters also.
Yeah.
That's
I,
getting back to that lens of wellness. It's almost
yeah.
we're looping back, right? Like you
Mm.
have to lead with that lens, because if the people providing the care don't matter, the people getting the care won't get good care.
And that will be our next discussion.
Yeah,
So,
beautiful.
what do you want people to take away from today's discussion?
What I'd like them to take away is the thought that there are things that they can do. I see so many people who feel stuck and like victims, and that everything around them is just happening, and either they have to leave or they have to stay and suffer, and that there are things that you can do that are literally not that hard. In fact, some of them are even awareness. The hardest step is deciding to make a change.
Mhm.
But once you get to that decision that you want to make a change, there are things that you can do, and tiny things, subtle as significant. I often say in yoga, I'm sure you've heard me say that. And so even subtle changes in the way you think about something can make what you do feel so much better. And when you feel better, that's when you can look at making a change. Many people just change. I have to get out of here. I'll do this other thing. And when you don't change the way you think, the next thing also doesn't work. And so,
I totally did that.
yeah, yeah, I did too. And so working on, realizing that it's also about you, and that there are things you can do. And when you
Yeah.
do that, you can make your own life better. You can potentially make things around you better if you want. And again, it's not your responsibility, only if you want. And you might decide after you've done your work on yourself that you want to be somewhere else, and that's fine too.
Yeah.
And so it's really, these tools give you back your agency, as you mentioned in the beginning. They give you back choice. They give you back your life, essentially. I think we sign up to do medicine and we give so much of our power away, but we don't have to.
Mhm.
And in fact, we're some of the smartest, most well-meaning humans in the world. And so if we could take back our agency and take back our sense of purpose and passion, that's where the solutions for ourselves and our patients and the whole system are going to ultimately come.
I love that message. And where can people find you?
They can find me, as we mentioned, at Pause and Presence, which is the name of my coaching and retreat business. And you can find me at pauseandpresence.com or jessiemahoney.md.com, just my name. And the Mindful Healers podcast, which is a fun podcast that Jillian will also be on shortly.
What? Excited.
And so I talk a lot about the different thought patterns. A few of them we mentioned today. So that's a place you can learn more about that. And then if you want to join me for yoga and Jillian for yoga, you can either join me on Zoom. I teach regularly. So if you go to my webpage and you click the yoga button, you can sign up and you'll get the links to come to the live stream classes, which are a lovely community
Yes,
of
they are.
doctors. And if that timing doesn't work, you also get the recordings and or go to the YouTube channel and do them there.
And make sure, as somebody who does YouTube, to subscribe to that YouTube channel and share it with anyone else who would love yoga.
Yes.
Well,
Please
thank you.
do. I'm there teaching, so we might as well spread it far and wide.
Yeah, I really do love it. It's the best type of yoga I've ever done. I love the coaching. I love you. And so thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And to the audience, make sure to drop your reflections and your questions down below. And until next time.